The answer is definitely breaking new ground. We've never done a project like this before.
A lot of people have been talking about this. The DEA just found the biggest underwater drug bust of $700 billion.
DEA just found the biggest underwater drug bust of $700 billion. Cartels tried to hide this forever. For years, cartels have tried to hide their money deep beneath the ocean, thinking no one would ever find it. Yet recently, the DEA just uncovered an underwater drug stash worth a shocking $700 billion. Experts are calling it the biggest bust in history.
One of the biggest drug busts on record there. Nearly 700 pounds of cocaine.
2 men were arrested, but prosecutors are looking to upgrade the charges now to include drug trafficking just because of the sheer amount of drugs that were found.
And the scale of what they discovered is almost unbelievable. But how did these cartels manage to keep something so massive under the sea for so long? Join us as we find out how the fortune was recovered. A mission impossible. A crew was sent on the mission by the United States Drug Enforcement Agency, DEA, each member with a specific discipline. Marine engineers handled the mechanical systems, survey specialists monitored navigation and sonar data, and ROV pilots prepared for hours of work from inside a sealed control room. This was not an improvised expedition. It was a technical recovery mission, planned around deep-sea mapping, historical shipping records, and months of simulation. Every person on board understood that their role connected directly to the success or failure of the entire operation. The vessel itself was designed for this kind of work. Its structure supported heavy lifting systems, deep water winches, and reinforced decks capable of handling extreme loads. Along the sides, cranes stood ready to deploy equipment. Inside, power systems ran constantly, feeding energy to navigation arrays, data processors, and the remotely operated vehicle that would soon descend thousands of meters below the surface. The ship was guided by satellite positioning systems that adjusted its course in small increments as it approached the designated coordinates. The objective of the mission was clear. A shipping container, lost years earlier during a maritime incident, had been tracked to a deep section of the ocean floor. Reports suggested the container carried assets of extraordinary value, but the operation was framed around recovery feasibility. Containers fall into the ocean more often than most people realize, especially during severe weather. But the majority are never located again due to depth, distance, and shifting seabed conditions. This case stood out because of the data trail left behind and the unusual interest surrounding its contents. Inside the control room, large monitors displayed layered maps of the seafloor. Sonar readings appeared as textured surfaces, revealing slopes, ridges, and depressions that could affect where a heavy object might settle after sinking. Analysts compared these images with historical models of current movement and sediment drift, narrowing down the most likely resting zone. This process eliminated large areas of uncertainty, allowing the crew to focus on a specific section of seabed rather than conducting a blind search. As the ship reached the target area, dynamic positioning systems activated to keep it stable against wind and surface currents. Even small movements at the surface could translate into large errors at depth. Operators confirmed coordinates repeatedly, cross-checking independent systems to ensure it was correct. Once the vessel held position, attention shifted to the deployment phase. The remotely operated vehicle was prepared on deck under strict procedural checks. Its cameras were tested, lights calibrated, and thrusters inspected. Robotic arms were cycled through their full range of motion, responding smoothly to commands issued from the control room. Sensors capable of measuring pressure, temperature, and proximity were synchronized with onboard software. The ROV was not designed for speed. It was built for endurance, stability, and precision in an environment where mistakes could not be corrected manually. When deployment began, the vehicle was lowered slowly into the water, guided by a crane and supported by a reinforced tether carrying power and data. As it passed below the surface, the camera feed transitioned from open water to filtered light, then gradually darkened. Depth readings increased steadily, and pressure values climbed far beyond levels survivable by humans. Communication remained constant, with operators adjusting descent speed to prevent stress on the tether and vehicle frame. During the descent, the ROV passed through layers of the ocean rarely observed directly. Particles drifted past the camera, illuminated briefly before disappearing again. Marine life became sparse, then vanished entirely. The water temperature dropped, and external light faded until only the vehicle's lamps defined the visible world. The crew monitored every parameter closely, aware that any anomaly at this stage could compromise the mission. As the ROV approached the seabed, sonar systems activated at higher resolution. The first outlines of terrain appeared as shadowed forms beneath the vehicle. Operators reduced speed and altitude, allowing the cameras to adjust to the changing environment. The ocean floor was uneven, shaped by geological forces and long-term sediment movement. Fine silt covered much of the surface, capable of obscuring objects if disturbed too aggressively. Search patterns were executed exactly as planned. The ROV moved along predefined paths, scanning the area systematically rather than reacting to visual cues alone. Sonar data highlighted areas of interest where artificial shapes might contrast with natural formations. The crew balanced patience with efficiency, aware that extended operations increased risk to equipment. The first indication of success came not as a dramatic reveal, but as an irregularity in the data. Sonar returns suggested a large rectangular mass partially embedded in sediment. The ROV was redirected carefully, approaching from an angle that minimized disturbance. As the cameras adjusted, straight edges began to emerge from the darkness, contrasting sharply with the surrounding seabed. Lighting levels were increased as sediment shifted and settled, revealing more of the object's surface. The shape matched the dimensions and structural features expected of a standard shipping container. Corrosion patterns indicated long-term exposure to salt water, and sections of the exterior showed deformation consistent with impact during descent. Despite this damage, the container remained largely intact, resting in a stable position. The container's presence raised immediate technical considerations. Its mass, combined with sediment adhesion and depth pressure, presented complex recovery challenges. The crew continued to observe without attempting interaction, prioritizing documentation and environmental assessment. Every second of footage added clarity to what lay ahead, while the container itself remained unmoving, anchored by gravity and time at the bottom of the sea. Finding the lost fortune. With the container now clearly identified, the operation shifted into a more analytical phase, where observation replaced movement and restraint became more important than speed. The remotely operated vehicle held a steady position several meters above the seabed, maintaining balance through subtle thruster adjustments. This distance was intentional. The priority was to understand exactly what they were dealing with before attempting any physical interaction. High-resolution cameras began a slow, deliberate survey of the container's exterior. The lighting revealed a surface altered by years of exposure to extreme pressure, cold temperatures, and corrosive seawater. Paint that once marked ownership and identification had faded almost completely, replaced by uneven textures and discoloration. Rust spread in irregular patterns, especially along seams and corners where water penetration was most aggressive. These details mattered. They told the crew how structurally compromised the container might be, and where stress points could fail if lifting forces were applied later. The ROV circled the container at a controlled pace, documenting each side from multiple angles.
During a remotely operated vehicle dive in June, Mbari scientists came upon one of these lost containers. The tracking information printed on the container was used to determine that it was lost just 4 months prior from the cargo vessel.
One long face appeared partially buried in sediment, suggesting that the container had settled unevenly after reaching the seabed. This raised immediate concerns. Sediment buildup could significantly increase the effective weight during recovery, requiring more lifting power than initially calculated. It also meant that parts of the container were hidden from view, potentially masking damage that could affect stability. The seabed itself became part of the assessment. Fine silt surrounded the container, disturbed only slightly by ocean currents over time. Unlike rocky terrain, this soft sediment could shift unexpectedly under pressure. If the container were moved without proper planning, it could sink deeper or tilt, increasing the risk of collapse. The crew studied how the container interacted with the ground beneath it, noting areas where the base appeared supported and areas where voids might exist. Sensors on the ROV recorded environmental data continuously. Temperature readings confirmed near-freezing conditions, while pressure measurements reinforced the extreme depth of the operation. These factors influenced material behavior. Metals reacted differently under constant pressure, becoming more brittle over time. The crew understood that what looked stable might behave unpredictably once forces were applied. Every decision had to account for this invisible stress. Attention turned to the container's structural integrity. Close-up footage showed warped panels and bent edges, evidence of impact during its descent. The top surface appeared relatively intact, while one corner showed significant deformation. This suggested that the container may have struck the seabed at an angle, absorbing most of the force through a single point. Such information was critical for determining where lifting attachments could be placed safely. The ROV's cameras focused on the locking mechanisms and door area, searching for signs of separation or failure. The doors remained closed, though corrosion had weakened the metal around the hinges. This indicated that the container had not ruptured completely, a positive sign for both recovery and containment. However, the crew did not assume anything about the contents inside. Pressure equalization, internal shifts, and long-term exposure could have altered the internal structure significantly. Lighting adjustments revealed marine growth clinging to parts of the container, thin layers of organisms adapted to life in darkness. Their presence confirmed how long the container had remained undisturbed. While minimal compared to shallow water wrecks, this biological layer still affected visibility and surface condition. Removing or disturbing it prematurely could create debris that interfered with equipment. The crew used laser measurement tools mounted on the ROV to calculate precise dimensions and orientation. These lasers projected reference points onto the container's surface, allowing software to generate accurate models in real time. The resulting data confirmed that the container matched standard dimensions, but slight distortions altered its geometry. This information fed directly into recovery planning, influencing weight distribution estimates and lift angle calculations. Communication within the control room remained technical and controlled. Operators exchanged observations, noting changes in sediment density, corrosion severity, and structural anomalies. Engineers compared this live data with predictive models developed before the mission. Where discrepancies appeared, assumptions were adjusted. The operation was evolving, shaped by what the ocean revealed, rather than what had been expected. The ROV repositioned to inspect the underside as much as possible without disturbing the sediment. This proved challenging. The container's base was largely obscured, but glimpses showed uneven contact with the seabed. This raised the possibility that the container could be partially suspended over softer ground, increasing the risk of sudden movement during lifting. Such a scenario required careful planning to avoid tipping or tearing the structure apart. Currents at depth were measured next. Though weaker than surface currents, even slow movement of water could influence suspended loads. The crew monitored how fine particles drifted past the container, using this as a visual indicator of flow direction and strength. These subtle movements informed decisions about lift timing and orientation, reducing the chance of lateral stress during recovery. The ROV completed its survey by holding position directly in front of the container, lights illuminating its full length. The image was steady, almost clinical, a damaged but intact structure resting under immense pressure, surrounded by darkness and silence. The crew absorbed the significance of what they were seeing, aware that the next phase would require interaction rather than observation. The container waited, unchanged by attention, as calculations and decisions continued above. The lift and the hidden dangers. The next stage was no longer about locating or observing, it was about intervention. Every action from this point forward carried irreversible consequences. The crew treated the shift with caution, transitioning from passive assessment to active engineering with deliberate restraint. Inside the control room, new data overlays appeared on the monitors. Structural models generated from earlier scans were refined, showing stress distribution across the container's frame. Engineers focused on load paths, identifying which sections could bear external force and which areas risked tearing under tension. The container's age, corrosion patterns, and deformation were factored into updated calculations. At this depth, assumptions were dangerous. Only measurable data guided decisions. On deck, preparations began for the lifting system. Heavy-duty cables were moved into position, each rated to withstand forces far beyond the container's estimated weight. These cables were not intended to lift the container directly from the surface. Instead, they would be guided down by the ROV and attached at precise points selected during analysis. Redundancy was built into every step. No single attachment would carry the full load. The goal was controlled balance, not brute force. The ROV repositioned itself closer to the container, maintaining careful clearance. Its robotic arms extended slowly, testing range of motion and responsiveness at depth. Operators adjusted sensitivity settings to account for delayed feedback and water resistance. Movements that seemed small on screen translated into significant force underwater. At this point, precision mattered more than speed. The first task involved clearing limited sediment from critical attachment zones. This was done cautiously, using low-pressure water jets and gentle arm movements. The intention was not to expose the entire base, but to create access points without destabilizing the container. Sediment drifted upward in thin clouds before settling again. Visibility fluctuated but remained manageable. The crew paused frequently, allowing conditions to stabilize before continuing. Once attachment points were sufficiently exposed, the ROV retrieved lifting collars designed to distribute force evenly. These collars were engineered specifically for deep-sea recovery, capable of gripping corroded surfaces without crushing weakened metal. The ROV aligned the first collar with a reinforced section near the container's frame. Operators coordinated carefully, adjusting angles and tension in small increments. The moment of contact was slow and intentional. The collar closed around the container with measured pressure, sensors confirming secure placement without excessive stress. Data readings updated instantly, showing how the container responded to the added load. No sudden shifts occurred. This was a positive sign, but the crew did not relax. One successful attachment did not guarantee overall stability. Additional collars were placed along the container's length, each one positioned to counterbalance potential torque during lifting. The ROV worked methodically, repeating the process with consistent precision. Time passed unnoticed as attention remained fixed on alignment, pressure values, and structural feedback. Fatigue was managed through rotation of operators, ensuring sharp focus throughout the process. Once all attachment points were secured, the lifting cables were tensioned slightly, not enough to move the container, but enough to test system response. As this happened, geedings were monitored closely. The container remained stable, its contact with the seabed unchanged. Engineers evaluated the results, adjusting load distribution to account for sediment resistance and uneven support beneath the base. The decision to initiate lift was not immediate. The crew conducted multiple simulations using live data, projecting how the container would behave once vertical force exceeded gravitational resistance. Variables included sediment suction, potential shifting of internal contents, and hydrodynamic drag. Each scenario was examined for failure points. The ocean offered no second chances. When the command was finally given, it came quietly. Winches engaged with minimal sound, applying force gradually through the cables. The container did not move at first. Sediment held it in place, resisting separation. But then, tension increased slowly, monitored in real time. Structural sensors embedded in the lifting system tracked micro-deformations along the container's frame. A subtle change appeared on the screen. Beneath one edge of the container, a narrow gap formed as sediment released its hold. The ROV adjusted position to maintain visual confirmation. Operators reduced lift speed even further, allowing the container to respond without shock. Another gap followed along the opposite side. The container began to separate from the seabed, millimeter by millimeter. The risk at this stage was highest. Uneven release could cause tilting, placing extreme stress on individual attachment points. The crew countered this by adjusting cable tension dynamically, redistributing load as the container's orientation shifted. The ROV's cameras provided constant feedback, guiding micro-adjustments in real time. As the container cleared the seabed completely, it hovered momentarily, suspended in the water column. This was a critical pause. Engineers assessed stability, confirming that weight distribution remained within safe margins. The container showed no signs of structural failure. Corroded sections held under load, validating earlier assessments. Ascent began slowly. The container rose through darkness, guided upward by synchronized winches. Water resistance increased as movement continued, adding lateral forces that had to be countered constantly. The ROV maintained close proximity, monitoring for unexpected flexing or debris release. The container moved as a single mass, steady but vulnerable. Minutes turned into extended intervals as the container continued to ascend. Depth indicators decreased gradually. Pressure reduced, altering how materials behaved. Engineers monitored these changes closely, aware that decompression could introduce new stresses. Throughout the lift, communication remained technical and concise. Every anomaly was discussed and resolved before proceeding. The operation demanded patience above all else, and speed offered no advantage here. The container continued its controlled ascent, leaving the seabed behind. What had rested in darkness for years now moved upward, guided by calculation and restraint. The crew maintained focus, fully aware that recovery was not complete simply because the container was in motion. The ocean still surrounded it, and the margin for error remained thin as the long journey toward the surface continued. The surface reveal. As the container continued its ascent through the water column, attention expanded beyond the mechanics of recovery to the broader significance of what was being brought back toward the surface. This phase of the operation existed at the intersection of engineering, economics, and global regulation.
The routes traveled by cargo ships can be treacherous, and container loss is difficult to prevent. It's estimated that thousands of containers are lost each year as they are transported along international shipping routes.
The crew understood that the container was not just a physical object, but a legal and financial entity, tied to ownership claims, international maritime law, and questions that extended far beyond the deck of the ship. Inside the control room, specialists not directly involved in piloting or lifting began reviewing documentation linked to the container's origin. Shipping manifests, insurance filings, and historical tracking data were brought back into focus. These records had guided the search initially, but now they carried new weight. The exact identification of the container would determine jurisdiction, recovery rights, and responsibility for what came next. Estimates of value of the contents were based on indirect indicators rather than confirmation. The crew avoided assumptions, focusing instead on probabilities derived from cargo classifications and trade routes associated with the vessel that lost it. Whatever was inside had been sealed for years under immense pressure, subject to temperature extremes and long-term isolation. This raised questions not only about value, but about condition. At the surface, preparation extended beyond physical handling. Legal observers and documentation specialists were on standby, ready to verify identification markers and record the recovery process in detail. Chain of custody protocols were prepared to ensure that every stage of handling was logged and witnessed. In recoveries of this scale, documentation was as important as machinery. Without it, disputes could invalidate the operation's outcome. The broader implications of the recovery were clear to everyone involved. Deep-sea recovery at this depth demonstrated capabilities that few organizations possessed. Successfully locating and lifting a container from such an environment pushed the boundaries of current maritime engineering.
Crew of Coast Guard Cutter Hamilton, and to all our incredible partners here today and those that are still out there doing the mission, I extend my deepest gratitude. Thank you for your extraordinary service, your unwavering commitment, and your tireless efforts to keep America safe.
It proved that objects once considered permanently lost were now within reach, given sufficient planning and resources. This realization carried consequences for global shipping, insurance industries, and environmental oversight. Once the container was secured on deck and stabilized against movement, the operation entered a phase governed almost entirely by protocol. Accessing it was treated as a controlled procedure rather than a reveal. Before any physical contact with the doors, identification markers were recorded in high resolution. Corroded serial numbers, structural stamps, and residual paint patterns were photographed, scanned, and logged. These details confirmed continuity between the recovered object and historical shipping records, ensuring the container's identity could be verified independently. Only after pressure stabilization was confirmed did the crew approach the doors. Hydraulic tools were used instead of manual force to prevent sudden shifts. Corrosion had fused parts of the locking mechanisms, requiring patient separation. As the doors began to move, cameras captured every second from multiple angles, creating an unbroken visual record of the first access since the container was lost. The interior revealed itself gradually. Lighting systems illuminated the contents without disturbing them. What appeared was orderly, tightly packed cargo, consistent with industrial shipping standards. Crates were reinforced and materials wrapped for long-distance transport. Even after years underwater, the packing configuration remained intact, showing that internal supports had absorbed much of the stress during descent and rest. Each visible item was documented before removal. Identification labels, packaging seals, and material markings were recorded in situ. Specialists compared these markings against existing manifests, noting consistencies and discrepancies. Among the cargo, stacks of gold bars gleamed under the lights. Neatly arranged bundles of dollar bills were secured in protective wrappings, and crates contained critical documentation and shipping records. Despite the extraordinary value, condition assessment took precedence over speculation. Removal followed a strict sequence. Items were extracted one at a time, using lift assist frames to prevent strain on compromised packaging. Each unit was placed into a controlled handling area for immediate inspection. Moisture levels, corrosion indicators, and structural integrity were evaluated. Some protective materials had degraded, while others had preserved the contents remarkably well. Documentation teams worked in parallel with handling crews. Every item received a unique identifier linked to photographic records, sensor readings, and positional data from within the container. Nothing was moved without being logged. Accountability was emphasized, recognizing that disputes over ownership or condition could arise long after recovery ended. As items were cleared, the container's interior structure became fully visible. Internal walls showed stress but remained intact. Limited water intrusion had occurred, but compartmentalization minimized widespread damage. This feature prevented cargo shifts, which could have compromised both the container and its contents during descent. Recovered items were repackaged using modern containment systems. Each unit, the gold bars, cash, bundles, and documentation, was sealed in climate-controlled casings to halt further degradation. Chain of custody documentation accompanied every step. Signatures, timestamps, and environmental readings were logged digitally and physically. The contents were not mere cargo, but high-value assets whose handling carried far-reaching implications. As the final items were removed, the container itself was inspected internally to confirm that nothing remained undocumented. Loose materials, packaging fragments, and structural elements were catalogued. Even debris was treated as evidence, capable of providing insight into the container's history and the conditions it endured. Once emptied, the container was resealed and marked for further analysis. Attention shifted entirely to the recovered contents, now secured, documented, and stabilized. Gold bars, stacks of dollar bills, and sensitive documentation, transitioning from the deep ocean into controlled custody, each step defined by precision, restraint, and responsibility. What do you think would happen to the recovered items? If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.